Tom Tugendhat.
Sir Roger, it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Thank you for calling me. I find myself standing here and for the first time, I think, ever agreeing wholeheartedly with the Honourable Member for Newport West. I think none of us are quite as surprised about that as I am, but I am even more surprised to hear the Honourable Member quoting warmly the words of President Bush. Admittedly, it was President Bush father and not son. Today is also one of the moments in this year when we will mark the anniversary, 500 years since St. Thomas More, who was tried and then executed not so far from this place, wrote the book Utopia, in which he envisioned a new future and a new ideal. He wrote it expressing in his heart the liberties of thought and faith that he hoped that what he called Englishmen then, and I think what Mr. Hannan would now refer to as the Anglosphere, would express across the globe. And yet today, a report has come out showing that the liberties he hoped for, the liberties he desired, are actually in trouble. An online journal called Spiked has gone around various universities and found that freedom of speech is being challenged. So-called safe spaces in our colleges, also could be known as spaces of censorship, now cover some 39% of universities. This is not just a threat to freedom of thought in those universities. As I see this debate covered by many of our friends from the Third Estate, it is worth remembering that they too are part of the Fourth Estate, forgive me. It is worth remembering that they too are part of the democratic process. And though we, who stand here and speak in the chamber, may sometimes not like it, their role in holding us to account is equally as important as ours in speaking the truth. And so it is with that cry of freedom and that cry of liberty that I speak in favour of considering, but in favour of rejecting this motion. Because liberty is not something we can take in portion or in part. It comes as one and it comes as a whole. And as the First Amendment of the US Constitution makes clear, that freedom of expression is essential for a free people. And that is why, although I may not like it, and although I can be absolutely sure that I wouldn't support it, it is no place of me or this House to criticize a man running for an elected office in a foreign country. We may not wish him here, we may not like him here, but we should not vote against his ability to speak or indeed criticize his right to travel, when we too value those same rights of liberty. Are you looking to intervene? Or yes?
I just wanted to be clear. Did the Honourable Member actually say it's not our place to criticise? Because that surely would be a curtailment of freedom of speech for those of us who are opposed to what he said. I'm pretty sure what he said was that we do not have the right to criticise.
You're quite right. We have the right to criticise, but we do not have the right to... I do not think that we have the right to prevent somebody who has campaigned for elected office... Sorry, the Honourable Lady is quite right. Although we have the right to criticise, we should not exercise that on people who are running for elected offices in foreign countries. I believe it is for the American people to judge him. I believe it is for the American people to hold him to account. It is not, I would argue, it is bad politics and it is bad judgment to intervene in the electoral processes of other countries, and I would wish to do it as little as possible. I will give way.
Based on what the Honourable Member is saying, the mayoral candidate from the Labour Party, the Honourable Member for Tooting, is of Muslim origin, and under Donald Trump would not be allowed to travel to America. Does the Honourable Member want to comment on that?
I'd be delighted to, on the grounds that I think the United States Constitution makes wonderful provision for the balance of powers, and that her failure to understand that the President of the United States is not a sovereign and not a despot, but is balanced by the Congress and by the courts, is a failure to understand why the United States, despite, let's face it, having one or two incumbents of the White House who may not have been Mensa candidates, the country has yet succeeded all the way through to today as a bastion of liberty and economic success. Now, today, as we consider also Martin Luther King Day, it is worth remembering that he too relied on these rights of freedom. He too relied on these rights when he was campaigning to desegregate the University of Alabama, and when those students bravely marched in on the 11th of June in '63, the prevailing opinion was that they should shut up. The prevailing opinion was that their rights of freedom of speech should be curtailed. Now, while I think this man is crazy, while I think this man has no valid points to make, I will not be the one to silence his voice. So when I think now about what more we should do, I say we should stand aside, and we should wait for an American to come forward, as the great Joe Welsh did, Chief Counsel of the United States Army, when he looked at Senator McCarthy in the '54 trials, and he said, "Have you no shame, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" Because if somebody will say that to Trump, surely that is better than for us to legislate on the freedom of expression and the freedom of travel of a citizen of that great country, the United States.
Nice shot.
Congratulate my friend for leading this debate. I'm going to start by quoting Martin Luther King, because I think Martin Luther King deserves much more recognition today than does Donald Trump. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So therefore, I do welcome this discussion. I am very grateful for the petitioners who have wanted us to raise our voice and have this debate. There are two things I'd like to share with you. I had lunch earlier on with a very interesting lunch with including, there were a number of people, including Rick Stengel, the Under-Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. And the conversations when we talked about how to get back to this Donald Trump debate was we agreed that actually Donald Trump is no more than a demagogue. He panders to people's fears as opposed to their strengths. And I should know, because I know that I helped, people of Bradford West helped me get rid of one in Bradford West this election. So we have, it's not the first time I've dealt with a demagogue. And, the two things I'd like to really point out for me, whilst I really, really value this debate, and whilst I really, really accept that this is a very emotive subject, and I understand and I respect the views of my colleagues who say we should ban this person from inciting hatred, I agree. However, what I would also say is that I, as a Member of Parliament for Bradford West, would give an open invitation to Donald Trump to visit my constituency. And the reason I'd give him an open invitation to visit my constituency, I'd take him to the synagogue, I'd take him to the church, I'd take him to the mosque, I'd invite him for a curry. We are curry capital of Britain. I would welcome him and I would have a conversation with him and challenge him on his views. And I would show him, when I've made my point, I would show him that actually I would invite him to feed the homeless with the In Touch Foundation, a Muslim charity who feeds homeless people in the city of Bradford. I would invite him to meet with the volunteers who helped out in my fellow colleagues' constituency, the Human Appeal Foundation, Muslim volunteers, and those people that work together in the issues which affect us as a country, which affected us as people, regardless of our race, regardless of our gender or ethnicity and our religion. That's what I'd show to him. What I would also... I give way.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. I'm a little bit confused. She said that she agreed with the ban, but at the same time she wanted to invite him to her constituency.
Sorry.
I don't see how this
Thank you
would
for your
work.
intervention. I respect the views of my colleagues. I do not agree to an overall ban. I don't. I would quite clearly invite Donald Trump to Bradford West. I think the curries are better in Bradford West as well. But there you go. So there's an issue for me about actually challenging that narrative. And I think it's important for us, in the name of democracy, to challenge that narrative, to challenge that hatred speech that comes out of his mouth. I would also, by the very same token, I stand here as a Muslim woman, as a proud British Muslim woman. And what I would say, and what I would say to, Donald Trump would like me banned from America. I wouldn't get my visa. But you know what? In my Islam and the Quran that I understand, in Surah 41 of verse 34, what it teaches me, and this isn't word for word, this is what I take from my Quran, is that goodness is better than evil. If someone does bad, you do good in return. So I will not allow the rhetoric of badness into my life, into my heart, or for that of my constituents. In return, what I will do is challenge that with goodness, because hatred breeds hate, and that is not something that I would tolerate. And on a final point, given that it is Martin Luther King Day, I would leave everybody with this quote. I have decided, in his words, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Thank you.
Dora Adkins.
Sir Roger, thank you for, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Sir Roger, I must make a declaration. I am the only member of Parliament who can claim to represent the good people of New York. New York in Lincolnshire. When those seeking religious sanctuary in the 1600s reached the shores of what we now know as the United States of America, this tiny hamlet in my constituency lent its name to a patch of land that grew to be one of the greatest cities on the planet. The good people of New York, the original New York, wear that honour lightly, all 150 people or so of them.
A woman friend allowed.
Yes.
Ted Cruz has launched a vicious attack on the people of New York, saying they are cosmopolitan. So I hope she will stand up for the people of New York. And will she know that actually, I've looked at the map, and not a single person from Lincolnshire has actually signed this petition to ban Donald Trump.
Well, Sir Edward, you are reaching my point before I am. I promise you I'm going to deal with New York values at the end of my speech. But turning, as I must, to Mr. Trump, his comments regarding Muslims are wrong. His policy to close borders, if he is elected as president, is bonkers. And if he met one or two of my constituents in one of the many excellent pubs in my constituency, then they may well tell him that he is a wazzock for dealing with this issue in this way. Because I sense that my constituents in New York or in Tetney, in Minting or in Mablethorpe, feel that their values are more than robust enough to survive anything that Mr. Trump may say. And that we in Lincolnshire, no, in fact, we in the United Kingdom should have enough confidence in our values to allow him to say whatever he wants in New York, in New York, Lincolnshire, or anywhere else in the world. Because our British values are stronger than some amongst us here today appear to fear. With pleasure.